because I just get to do the welcoming and gratitude, which deep gratitude for a July meeting, end of July meeting on a very hot day at the end of a Monday. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you being here. We are recording, as you just saw, and I think we'll have a slide on that coming up next, but I just want to extend gratitude. Thank you for Amy from Sea Change also being here to help facilitate. And I will turn it over to Vanessa. I think that's my.
Yep. Hi, everyone. Just a reminder that we're live recording and will be posted for public viewing. So just wanted to give you a reminder. If we go to the next slide, I'm going to jump us into community agreements. So we wanted to just take a moment and revisit our community agreements and then just have you pick which one feels important to center in our work today. As you read through, maybe pick one in the chat that you want to hold close to for today. Great. I see a couple keep hopes and then keep it personal, local, immediate, and strive for growth. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Vanessa.
Yeah, hi everybody, welcome. Nice to see all of you on this hot summer day. So just in terms of our timing for today, we wanted to spend most of the time really diving into the recommendations and talking through those. So we're not going to be breaking off into little groups today, so a little bit different in that way. And we're hoping in the chat to just look at these images and think about which one do you feel like resonates your feelings or thoughts about where we currently are with our SEL framework and standards. So as we enter the space today, which image seems to kind of fit with that? And if you could name the number and then just a quick reason why you chose that, that'd be awesome as a way for us to connect and engage with each other. Nice. All hands on the tree, planting the seeds of change and hope. I love how people look into things differently with metaphors. Yeah, 6, everyone moving along the same path. I feel like we're still working on the soil. Love that. So we grow a great crop across the state. Yay. Leticia, team effort. 4. Right, the hands on the tree. Angela, I thought you'd pick the marathon. Love it. Annie, things got messy. It's coming together for good things in the future. Yay. I know, it's so nice. My garden's becoming alive, really alive right now. And 6, focusing on getting us to the finish line. Yep, we're right around the corner. So thank you, everybody. We can move to the next slide. So I just wanted to take a moment as we think about where we are and where we're heading to really situate this work and the work of this report. And just want to start off with deep appreciation for all of you for our collective efforts together and your individual commitment and time and dedication. It's been tremendous, and we really are very appreciative for that. And we are getting close, so that feels good, right? We're getting to that finish line, which means another kind of start will pick up after this. And so we're starting to pivot and orient towards that. And so, as Alexa said, we have really one more meeting in August before we close out this phase of the work. And just wanted to ground ourselves back in some of the language of the bill that kind of sets the tone for why we're here and what happens next. So I'll just read it out loud here. The advisory group shall submit a report to the board that describes the proposed standards and framework. The board shall consider the report when adopting the standards and framework, and the board shall adopt the social emotional learning standards and the social emotional framework described in section 4 of this 2021 Act no later than September 15th of 2023. So just that next phase, right? That next year of what will happen in terms of bringing these recommendations into that next chapter. So we are really hopeful that some of you are interested in continuing and want to be part of that next phase. So we're working on the application and the email that's going to go out across Oregon to convene the SEL panel that will take these recommendations and essentially with their perspectives help it evolve into what will be the final recommendations in 2023, so a year from now. And so let me know if you're interested in being part of that work. We want to have a balance of folks that have been on this group and also have new perspectives and add some teacher voice that is needed. So please reach out and consider applying to that next phase. And with that, I will pass it over to Amy, who's going to share a little bit about our objectives today.
All right. Hi, all. I will echo the thank you for being here. Nice to see you all this warm Monday. I like that maybe our brain energy is creating these heat waves as we figure out these standards and framework. I'm pausing just to look at numbers. I think we still need one more person to get to consensus. Is that right, Vanessa?
I think it is. And I do know that Subin did email just a little bit ago and say he's going to be here. So we can.
Yes, it is Subin that we're waiting for. Yeah.
All right. I will keep going. Wait. So today is really about getting deeply into the recommendations. Again, we're going to bring forward the feedback you all gave on the last version of the recommendations. We'll share that transparently in the meeting, as well as feedback from the previous meeting, and show you what that means for current version of the recommendations. So Vanessa and Beth and others worked hard to incorporate feedback. And so we'll show you transparently how that's shaping up. We will take consensus votes on the recommendations. This is really the meeting where we get into taking consensus votes and understanding where we might land in the report and what might need to be held as a question or consideration in the report. And then, like I just mentioned, determine where more clarity is needed before the August meeting. So that is the plan for today. We're going to use the same 0 through 5 model that we used previously. We're going to be fairly process focused. So we have some documents where we're going to be tracking our feedback. We're going to be doing our voting. We're going to be using a timer. So we make sure we get through each part of the recommendations and get that feedback. And like I said, there may be places where we don't get the consensus today, and that's all right. We will hold those questions and considerations, and they may end up in the final report if we don't get there. But we're all going to work together and get as close as we can on each piece of the recommendations today. All right. So you want to go to the next slide? This is just a reminder of the consensus voting, the 0 through 5 model. If we are at 3s, 4s, and 5s, we are taking that as consensus. So we're a work group working together. It means that you might not feel like everything is exactly as you would want it if this were your report that you were doing on your own. But if you're at a 3, 4, or 5, it means that you feel comfortable, you think it's a good idea, you're willing to let it move forward. And if you're at a 2 or 1 or a 0, it means in some way don't support it, don't feel like it aligns to the guiding principles, to the work we're trying to do together. All right. I'm gonna talk slowly. We can hopefully get our last.
Hey, Amy, let me interrupt
Yeah.
you so you
Mhm.
can, yeah, we can all be on the same page. So I just heard that Jill is going to be joining us in 5 minutes. So that will be enough to have a quorum. And then I believe Subin will be joining us too, like he said. So we can move forward.
Okay, perfect.
And just before we do that, I just have to say, it is hard to write a group report like this and get consensus. So just again, thank you for prioritizing this meeting so much. Look, see, as I'm even talking, here comes Subin. Just really thank you. I mean, it really is hard. This is not easy. And it was so messy in the beginning, and just to see how far we've come. So I just also want to pause and celebrate where we are right now with this report, and excited to be making these decisions together so that we can even take it a step further. So just want to just pause and say thank you again.
Yeah, thanks, Alexa.
And welcome, Subin. We needed you.
All right, so the way this first part of the meeting is going to work for about the next 45 minutes is we're going to walk through each of the recommendations. Vanessa is going to screen share and show you the feedback on the recommendations you saw and gave feedback on. Many of you put your name at a 1, 2, 3, or 4 on the recommendations. And then we'll show you what the current version of the recommendations is, so how the feedback was used. And after each section, so we're going to start with system standards because we've spent the least amount of time as a group there. Like I said, Vanessa will show you the recommendations you saw, the feedback on those, and then the new version of the recommendations that takes the feedback into consideration. And then we'll take 5 minutes to have individual think time. If there are any outstanding questions or concerns about where the recommendations have landed, we'll write those down in a document. We'll read them out loud together. I'll read them out loud so we can be on the same page about what those outstanding questions or concerns are. And then we'll move on. So the first 45 minutes are just talking through what the current recommendations are, how they were changed with your feedback from last time, and then elevating any questions or concerns. Once we get through all 3 pieces, the system standards, the student standards, and the guiding principles, we'll take a 5-minute break. And then when we come back, we'll actually get into the consensus voting. And the way that'll work is we'll have time for discussion to hear about those questions or concerns. We'll set a timer for 10 minutes. Like I said, in this meeting, we're going to try to really pay attention to getting through all of those pieces. And so I will set a timer for discussion. At the end of that timer, we'll take a consensus vote. If we aren't at consensus, we'll take recommendations for how the recommendation should change. We'll take more votes and see where we land. So that's laying out where we're headed. But for this first 45 minutes, we're just looking at where the recommendations are now, understanding how the feedback got incorporated into them, and then taking some time for individual reflection, questions, and concerns. All right, I'll turn it over to you, Vanessa.
All right, thanks for that, Amy. And yeah, welcome, Subin. So we're going to start off with system standards fundamentals, and Beth is going to put in the chat the 2 documents that we're toggling back and forth in, just to track where the changes are and what we are putting out there for you to react to, respond to, discuss, and vote on as the next phase of this. So we'll start off with the recommendations, the initial ones from July 1st. And so in terms of the system standards, there was not a whole lot in terms of shifts that you all gave feedback around. It was mostly some wordsmithing and making sure that some of the student success plan language was more broad and encompassing to all students, all different affinity groups, especially as we're talking about systems. So that was one noted change, and I can kind of share here.
Vanessa, do you want to just show where the group landed in the voting on the first one too. So
Yeah.
people can see that.
Let's see. So the first one was, let me find my spot
there.
here.
Oh. There we are.
Okay, there we are. So just so we kind of get a picture, those that saw the document and gave feedback were at a 3. So we were kind of approaching that it feels like it's on the right path. Nothing really drastic needs to change. It looks like most of us are heading in the direction of feeling pretty strongly about this section. And so that's where we were. And so some of the actual changes that were made, and I tracked them here on the side in the comment, was, okay, let me find it. There we go. So we made changes to the language to be more broad and encompassing, so not so specific to each individual student success plan. We also reorganized the numbers and letters to flow and match better. That was a easy suggestion. And then there was an ask to include administrator training as well. So not just stopping with educators, but involving administrators in training around SEL. So you can see that reflected. So anything in green showcases those changes. And then some of the recommendations that Jill had made, that she put them in the student standards, seemed to be more in line with system pieces. So really thinking about the adult component of it, classroom conditions and school conditions. So we added those pieces over here. So kind of built on that idea, but incorporated into the system piece, because it was kind of outside of the standards for students. So those were the changes made between the 2 drafts.
Great. So before we take a moment to give you time to reflect on these and elevate any questions or outstanding concerns in the notes, do you have any clarifying questions for Vanessa about changes that were made? You can put them in the chat or you're welcome to unmute. Okay. Great. So we'll take 5 minutes for reflection on this. So if you want to look through that version 2 again, you can. And then we're going to be working in a document together as we take notes and votes. Thank you. So Beth just shared it there. So as you look through those recommendations, the changes, if you have any clarifying questions or outstanding concerns, you can put them in one of these boxes at the top of the document underneath system standards and implementation guidance. Here, you don't need to attach your name to it if you don't want to, but we just want to make sure any outstanding questions or concerns are elevated at this point so we can come back to them in the next part of the meeting after the break. So put on a 5-minute timer and give you time to reflect, elevate any pieces. You can turn your camera off if you want to, and then we'll pick up in 5 minutes. got another 2.5 minutes. I'm just going to put on some background music. I have 30 more seconds and we'll come back together. All right. You can finish up your comment if you're still writing. Right now, as I mentioned, I'm just gonna read them all so we're all on the same page about any outstanding questions or concerns on these. And then we're gonna move to the next section and we'll come back to these in the second half of the meeting. So first one, on page 13, Subin, I'm wondering if you mean page 8, the revised draft? Or,
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
okay, great. So I was seeking clarity. So on educator and administrator licensure, there are aspects of getting towards inclusion, integrating experiences, but there should also be something related to self-understanding and awareness of bias, privilege, and positionality. A small addition to that bullet point. And you're talking specifically in bullet point, under school conditions, B.
Yeah, 2B. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, 2B. That one would get at inclusion or attempts to. And then but I don't want to lose that. In order for teachers to get to that point, there's an understanding of bias, privilege, positionality. That's always a part of that journey.
Great. Okay. Next one. On collaboration, change parents to caregivers, add community partners. This might be mental health, CBOs, etc., who do SEL work in our schools. Okay, so some additional partners there and just changing parent to caregivers. The next one, I still think we are missing an opportunity to attach what we know about our development and brain science, which provides a more clear why SEL skills work. Todd. Todd, to clarify there, are you suggesting, is this a framing suggestion, or are you feeling like there's a needed additional system standard that's not here?
No, I think it's more framing. I think the standards are, I'm okay with the way they are, but I'm leaping ahead to rolling this stuff out. So I'm just trying to set the foundation. When people know why, they tend to go, oh, that's why we do that.
Yeah.
And we might be missing that opportunity. So I just might be myself too. So that's okay.
I appreciate you holding that. And I know we're sort of we're looking at the recommendations, and they exist inside a larger report that does have way more of that context. So we'll make sure if there's anything that feels like it's particularly missing in the recommendations, knowing that we're putting a lot of the framing and why in the report, but always welcome to raise that and make sure we aren't missing something important that you think should be there. Okay, next one, wordsmith on page 8, understand that trauma has an impact on students but doesn't define them. Trauma-informed discourses tend to be deficit-oriented when implemented. Okay, so just a wordsmith piece to make sure that we're using more of an asset-based frame, less of a deficit-based frame when we're talking about trauma-informed.
Yeah, and it's not deficit framed right now. It's more just calling out specifically that trauma doesn't define people of color, people with different backgrounds than dominant mainstream. And so, yeah, just I think it's a sentence that I'm suggesting adding.
Great. Okay. And then page 9, developmentally appropriate refers to practices based on research and information about how children develop and learn across all cultures. Just a small addition to the quote that defines it. Also on page 9.
Yeah, I just assume that the term developmentally appropriate, there won't be that much couching or framing around it as much as there is around SEL. And I know sometimes that term can be either misunderstood, misused, even triggering for some folks. And so, and the quote that was chosen is great, is a really good one. But at its core, the definition of SEL is just using principles of child development. It's using principles of psychology and research. And so I just want to make sure that that is clear for folks, since this is a section that's defining that.
Mm-hmm. And to clarify, Subin, where are you seeing that quote?
It says the NAEYC, so National Association for Education of Young Children, describes this concept as follows: building on each child's strengths and taking care to, yeah, that quote.
I'm wondering if you're in the full report document. And
Okay, I'm
not
not
just
in the
the
right document.
recommendations.
All right.
That's all good. This is good feedback on the full.
All right, let's look.
Right.
Let's go. I got this.
Talking,
Okay, page
Stephen's
3.
talking about the guiding principle of developmentally appropriate on page, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, we'll hold that for the guiding principle piece. That's good feedback. And so the part that we're on currently is just the system standards in the document that says revised recommendations, draft for feedback, 7/22/22. Great. Okay, so some of those pieces on framing will pull down to the guiding principles. Okay, so again, yeah, thanks, Beth. We'll hold there. So we've heard some outstanding questions, framing considerations, and we'll come back to these when we do our voting. I'll turn it back over to Vanessa to now move us into the student standards piece.
Okay, so we're looking at student standards. And so this was the initial thinking when this was shared out. So as you can see, we have 2 members who were not fully yet willing to support what we had included in terms of student standard piece. And then the rest kind of more into the consensus place of moving ahead with some suggestions for feedback. So I'll highlight some of those, and you can see everyone's actual comments down in here. And then let's go to the revised version. And just want to share what the changes have been made. So the first one was there was 2 members that were concerned about how the SEL focal constructs and the CASEL competencies were kind of communicated. And so what I did was took out that chart that kind of had the SEL focal construct first, and then the CASEL competency that's connected to it underneath it. And so got rid of that. And therefore SEL is not like on top, and really kept with the initial conversation and the language in here that talked about them being braided together. And so just kind of created an image that shows how the CASEL competencies and the focal constructs come together as a braid, and then defining them each down below. So that's not hierarchical in any kind of way. So that was one of the shifts that were made to the standards. Another one was change some wording on 2B that Jill had recommended. So down here, as we get into 2B, some of these were just recommendations in terms of wordsmithing, so we changed that. And then deleted 2C. So this was in response to the developmentally appropriate and writing it in grade level bands. So the proposal is to not have that. We had conversations about looking at it more broad and holistic, like the mathematical practices, and thinking that developmentally appropriate was already a part of the guiding principles. So noting that that was a desire for the group to have that and name that, and that is already up in the guiding principles. And then the last piece was there were comments about MTSS specific, and how do we bring those into that SEL is something that we do and serve all students. And so in working with Jim provided this language, and really kind of not talking about or using MTSS or adding a new framework, but thinking about what is essential about that concept that we want to surface here. And so that's what you'll see that is captured in D. So that would be a new addition to the student standards. So those are the pieces.
Thanks, Vanessa. So again, we're going to take 5 minutes. We're going to be in this revised recommendations draft for feedback 7/22/22 document. So this is the current proposal based on feedback from the group and the changes that were made. So we're going to take 5 minutes for you to spend time with what's there around the student standards and elevate any concerns or questions that you have about how this is being framed. What I'm feeling for myself and noticing is going through these pieces on their own can be challenging to hold the whole picture, right? So we just, actually, I think it would be helpful to show the framework slide really quick. So let me do that. This slide here. Oh, Beth, I see you have a hand raised.
Yeah, just two things that I wanted to add, and Vanessa, feel free to jump in. With the first change to the student standards around that braided language, that really aligned with and resonated with a lot of the advisory group members from when we were meeting with you all. So we wanted to add that language in. And then just another comment is that when we were meeting with the student success groups, the SEL really aligned well with them, and they kept speaking to that and really loved seeing those constructs. So that was something that we wanted to make sure that as we were thinking of like what it could look like, that those were intertwined with the CASEL competencies. So Vanessa, is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, that sounds good.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Beth. So what I want to do is just remind us, we're looking at each of these pieces individually, but what we're actually presenting is a full framework. This group is saying, we don't want student standards to exist on their own, that doing SEL work we recognize is not just about student behaviors and experiences. It is also about how the system functions and performs and supports students and adults. So that's why we built this framework like this, so that student standards are one piece, system standards are one piece. They're all based on the foundation of the guiding principles, and that we've named some of those implementation considerations and opportunities in each of these pieces. So this is the full package that will be delivered as this group's framework and recommendations. So as you're looking at these pieces individually, just trying to keep that whole framework in mind. And there's a lot of context in the full report around why we shouldn't just have student standards on their own, why system standards are really important to the implementation, as people were discussing. That we want to set this work up for success. And as many of you have named, that requires a lot of focus on the adults in the system and the way the system functions and operates, how we train, support, those sorts of pieces. So just trying to hold the whole as you give feedback. And also there's totally space if you feel like something is missing from an individual part, let's name it, but let's not lose sight of the whole house as we think about it too.
Just to be clear, we're looking at just for the top of 4, 5, and 6. That was my question, correct?
Yeah, let me pull up the document.
For this next part.
Yes, so we are
Okay.
looking at the student standards piece, which start, yes, on page 4, 5, and 6.
Thanks, Beth.
Mhm.
Good,
Very funny.
good job,
very funny.
Steven. But it's the same thing. Like I need the where to start and where to stop. So right there with you.
Yes. 4, 5, and 6 in the document that is named Revised Recommendations Draft for Feedback 7/22/22. I know, so many drafts. So I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes. I'm going to put some background music on. And what you're doing is elevating any questions or concerns that you're holding about this current draft of the student standards recommendations. And you're doing that in the same document, the group notes document. Yep, I think some of you found it, but I will share it again. I'll put in a little bookmark so it should take you right to, oh, thank you, Beth. Should take you right to that spot. To write your notes. Okay. 5 minutes. take 2 more minutes and come back. Okay, I'm gonna finish up. You're in the middle of typing something, if you want to finish that up. And then like last time, I'm just gonna talk through them so we all hear each other's and seek any clarity. And then we're gonna hold them and move to the next piece. And I did see that some of the pieces on student standards are in the system standards framework, which this is a process, so it's okay. We'll find them wherever you put feedback. But let me know if I don't see yours. So I'm starting up towards the top of the document, one that got added here on the right side. All students should be able to access the standards and be met where they're at in their SEL concepts and skills. This person says, I think the wording here could read, all students should be provided support depending on where they are according to the standards or something like that. So more about supporting students regardless of where they are.
Well, one, I think it's a little awkwardly worded too. This puts the onus on the students rather than putting the onus on the adults that are supporting the students. So that's where it came in. I apologize for putting it in the wrong box too.
That's
Again,
okay.
I need a little help or assistance. So, and the wording is not perfect. It was just came to me at 5 o'clock and at 5:30 on a Monday, but
I hear you, but you're wanting to make sure.
basically you're saying students you're going to instruct them or meet them where they are, rather than so
Mhm.
they are where they are.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think as we get into what the revisions on here might be, thinking about what are we saying about the standards themselves and how they should be written. And so what I'm hearing you say is all students should be provided with support, which might not change how the standards are written, but might be in how we talk about supporting students.
But
So
I'm
what you're
also saying it in that sentence itself. One, it's awkwardly worded too. So the meeting students where they're at in their SEL. That's, I'd love to have proper English. So that's not proper English. And then the second piece is this is again, I think the onus is more on the student here. So I'm not going to die on this horse, but I'm in this hill, but just thinking about that.
Yeah, I hear that.
I'm wondering if we took, Holly, if we took that sentence out completely and relied on the next on part D to express that concept, if that might help. There was also the suggestion in part D to add a clause at the very end of the sentence as in MTSS.
Yeah, I mean that the D just D would cover it, I think, Jim.
Okay, so it might be that that one doesn't need to be there. That's the feedback. Okay. So the next one, seeing, is this a good place to make suggestions for how the standards would actually look and feel when they're used by the teacher? For example, the standards are used to just observe specific behaviors in an evaluative form. The use of standards would be contrasting from the values we're trying to put forth. So my suggestion is a bullet point that proposes that the aims of social and emotional work might include things like repairing mistakes, working collaboratively toward a positive climate, feeling safety regardless of identity. This could be developmentally appropriate, not just an arrival and then done. At all ages and all grades, they'd have more and more sophisticated forms of repairing relationships, working collectively, etc. Yeah, so I think this person is asking about getting more specific about what the standards would look like. I think at this point in our framework, we aren't getting to that level of detail. What our hope is for this group is you're outlining a framework for the next group to work from. So, and what our framework says right now is we're integrating the CASEL competencies and the SEL focal constructs. And then we have those bullet points below that offer a little more guidance on what those should look like, but we aren't getting to the level of detail on the student standards at this point of what they might mean.
Okay, that sounds good. And sorry, I do not want to throw wrenches at the finish line. So that is not my intention.
Great questions.
What I'm okay with this. I could be a 3, but the one of the things that I'm trying to capture is I feel like we've had so many conversations in the past of the kinds of things that we don't want to show up in the standards, right?
Mhm.
And I'm like, this feels like a place to name some of those things. And if what I'm hearing from you is no, this isn't that place, then I can move on and I can turn off my microphone.
No, I think that's a good clarification. And we've had some of this conversation too. There's some of that might be able to be done in the framing of the recommendations in general and in the report framing. I think we do some of that in the way the report is written right now about pitfalls and what to be careful of. But I think there is space in these A through D, and maybe there are other ones on page 6. If we want to name how these student standards should or shouldn't be implemented, this is a place to name that. So again, holding that this exists next to the system standards, and some of these pieces around like adult behaviors and support are named there. But if there is something like, I think the high level of what you've named, Subin, around like not being used to evaluate student behavior, that could be something that this advisory group wants to name as for the next group to take into consideration, that these standards should not be written or used in an evaluative way.
I was gonna, first I want to acknowledge, I see Jim's. I wonder if our school psychologists might think that it would be helpful as an evaluation tool. So I'm not sure if we're all in agreement on that or not. But I was gonna say something similar to Subin, that an example could help. I mean, maybe it is that we say if everybody isn't agreed upon, if everybody agrees on that they aren't used for evaluation. But I still feel like an example would be helpful, because we're really trying to re-envision. And if we're creating something that's not really out there, or something like similar to the way the math standards are written, that might be helpful. I see Jim unmuted.
Mhm.
I did. I appreciate your calling that out, Jill. I think when we talk about evaluation, that people automatically assume some form of quantitative evaluation, some way of measuring. And there are many methods of evaluation, not just quantitative, that are more culturally sensitive, and that I think that we could really take a look at. I would be dead set against saying no evaluation, because I think one of our responsibilities is accountability. If we are going to implement SEL, how do we know that it's having an effect? To answer that question, you have to have some type of evaluation. Again, it doesn't have to be quantitative. It can be some other form of evaluation that's more qualitative, that is more in line with the values of all of our stakeholders. But I just want to be I want us to be really careful with that word evaluation and saying no evaluation. Because it means different things to different people.
Thanks, all. And right now, the recommendations say nothing about it. So if there's like something you want to put in the questions or concerns for us to come back to or to recommend later, please do. I was just providing an example of the kind of like high level guidance that we want to give to the next group around the standards. So what I'm taking away from these pieces too, if someone wants to put it in here, is a desire for some examples of what integrated pieces might look like, knowing that we aren't deciding on the specific standards, we are giving guidance to the next group. But whatever you think is necessary and helpful for that next group to know what we intend, what this group intends, then let's name that. I see Andrea and then Jill.
Just kind of, I hear the sentiment that Steuben is putting forward, in that I would say that what I'm hearing is putting forward a caution that we don't want to use sort of SEL as a way to rank and sort students into proficient, not proficient, overly proficient, in ways that we've ranked and sorted students by other kinds of educational competencies. And to Jim's point, right, and Jill's point, the word evaluation has very specific meanings for very specific groups within the education world. And I agree with the sentiment, Steuben, that you're putting forth, because that's one of my big concerns, is the way when it comes to implementation about how districts or schools might approach this by using the corporate SEL audits to then create these data walls about which kid is this in SEL and which kid is that. Like that bothers me, and I have concerns around that. I also have concerns about, I think we've really gone to a place in this report where we're making a high level set of recommendations to set up the next group. I think if we start to add too many examples in this section, we run the risk of sort of going backwards in the work. I agree with Steuben around standards and the ways that those have been rolled out to teachers in the past in ways that have been harmful to content standards instead of helpful. But I also wonder, I don't know if this is the place to start putting in too many directives or examples. I think I would agree putting in something around directing the future advisory group to collect or to listen to educator and student voice on how to develop the standards.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Andrea. Great. I see Jill's hand, and then before we get to break, we're going to talk about guiding principles, and then we'll take a break then. Jill?
Yeah, hi. Not just to I don't want to belabor the topic, but I just think this is a critical point that we need to give guidance, and maybe in the big paper, there's guidance, but I know I've had meetings with our school psychologist, and we keep going around and around where she wants standards, and we're really leery to have standards because we know they can be used to harm kids, to exclude kids. Where the school psychologist perspective is, how do we know what kids need? How do we hold teachers accountable? So it's really a tricky one. And I think in the standard section, it would be nice to state something about that there is a statement about flexibility, no matter the context, but something that really clearly states that, I guess, the purpose of the standards, so that they're written in a way that doesn't create harm to students, in particular our students of color. And that's the only reason I suggest writing an example, or when I see the math standards, the way they're written, there's a lot of room there. So that's my wish.
Thanks, Jill. I'm seeing a couple more hands, so I'm going to revise what I said and take the rest of the comments. We'll take a break. We'll come back to this part of the conversation. So Holly and then Annie.
Yeah, I was just going to say an example of looking at an evaluation of standards. I just had a principal talk to me about that they didn't think that they were making growth with students and all their efforts that they have done this year. And then when they looked at an evaluation, they saw the progression of students that they didn't think were making any progress, and they were thrilled to see that they had made progress. So I think that we need to be careful on saying that there's no evaluation, as opposed, I think that there needs to be some sort of guideline set.
Thanks, Holly.
And otherwise, if we don't say that there's any evaluation, then I'm going to play devil's advocate. What's the point in it? And I'm not saying that we put the onus on the students either. So I just think we need to be careful in how we word things. It's tricky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what I'd encourage thinking about, because we're going to get into this in the next phase, is what is the high level guidance for that next group that captures this perspective? Because that's what we'll need to name here and take a consensus vote on. So if your wheels are turning around how to say that, put it in the document now or think about it, because that's what the level of specificity we'll need to get a consensus vote on what should be in the recommendations. Annie, I don't think we'd heard from you yet, and then we'll go to Susan.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking about what Jill was saying, and I was feeling that we hadn't really called that part out about, like, we're not repeating or prioritizing that white dominant culture piece. I think we kind of say it in the first bullet point, but then in the other, in section 2, they're written in a way that given any context or environment, but I feel like we still really need to name that, like, we're not going to perpetuate harm that we've perpetuated in some other ways. And then, like, distangling that trauma piece from that a little bit, like, it feels like an add-on that maybe needs to be in a different section.
Mm-hmm. So some framing around the stand shouldn't be used to perpetuate white dominant culture. And then the second piece you mentioned, say that again.
Yeah, I think the trauma part that they're talking about, I'm struggling with, because
Mm-hmm.
like, we know our brains are still malleable and that, like, they can still change, and by saying that the trauma will permanently impact our abilities to have these competencies, I don't think that's an accurate statement. And then I think we also need to name racism and oppression as a form of the toxic stress specifically too, so that we add that lens and layer.
Thanks, Annie. Subin.
I have so much to say, but I won't say all of it. And so just want to quickly revise. It's not evaluation that I'm worried about. I think I made that, I hopefully changed my comments in the document to reflect that. I agree. So I'm sorry that I kicked up that aspect, but it was a good conversation. What I am worried about are the things that we're talking about here, where standards in the past have been used as a way to normalize a certain set of practices or discourses that have often were not designed by or created alongside people of diverse perspectives. And so that reminds me of the other comment that I put here in the document. I think there was conversation we had in the past around when it gets time to writing all the standards, that we are suggesting there be some sort of engagement effort that comes with that. Is that going in a different document or in here?
We had held a place in the report, Subin, for some engagement recommendations. I don't know, Vanessa, where we're at on those.
Yeah, I think we're definitely honoring that. That's definitely something we're thinking of. We don't know right now where that fits into this because it's outside of the group's charge. And it's important to name. So I think we can say some of those pieces, like what our hopes are. Not so much based on the applications or those parts, because that will happen before even September 22nd. But things like that, like what you are hoping that that includes, I think we should name it.
Yeah.
And it is in the report, I should say, it is in the report that there is a recommendation for further engagement to happen.
Yeah, and it doesn't prevent us from naming it in the report, even if the work group is being formed in the moment. So. Okay, thank you all for engaging in there. I saw some comments like we seem pretty close in our ideas in this, we just need to name it. So that's what we're going to attempt to do in the next piece. What I want to invite us to do now is take a 5-minute break. We'll come back and read any comments we didn't get to yet, and then we'll get into the guiding principles piece. And then we'll move into the voting section. So take a 5-minute break. That puts us at 7:47. Okay, 5:47. See you in 5 minutes. welcome back. Welcome back, everyone. All right. So, yes, feel free to take care of your food needs, whatever you need to do. I just chatted with Vanessa, and I think we're going to revise process a little bit here. So what we're going to do is do a similar thing with guiding principles, where Vanessa is going to show us the changes that were made, the current draft of the recommendations. We'll take a few minutes to elevate any concerns or questions. And then instead of moving into a full group discussion, what we're going to do is invite some small groups to make revisions to the recommendations for us to vote on. So it feels like you've all gotten to hear each other's feedback now, and you're probably all in the best position to interpret that feedback into specific changes in the recommendations. So we're going to attempt to do that by splitting into some small groups after this piece, making some revisions, and then coming back and seeing how close we are to consensus. So that's the plan. So let's do the guiding principles, Vanessa, and then we'll move there.
All right. So here we are, guiding principles. So everybody who looked at it was at a 3 or above. So that means supporting it overall, but maybe some minor tweaks and changes need to be made. And that's exactly what was proposed. There was some language changes that were identified, some appreciation for some things being removed. So what has happened is we attempted to go through each one and incorporated some of the wording. And so you'll see that show up in strength-based. Some things have been crossed out, some things have been added. Based on the recommendations, we added this idea of district and not just school system, so expanding that out. And then some of the trauma-informed language, also based on the feedback, wove that in. And those were the only pieces in the guiding principles that were named as areas to revise and refine. So not a whole lot in that section.
Great. So we won't take a full 5 minutes for this one. But in the same notes document, if you keep scrolling down, there's a section for guiding principles, clarifying questions or outstanding concerns. That same document we were taking notes. Let's just take 2 minutes. If there are any outstanding questions or concerns about the current framing of the guiding principles, if you'd put those in there now. All right, finish your comments there. I like that the two people are writing next to each other and reflecting on each other's comments in the document. Okay, so what I'm seeing on the guiding principles, I'm curious if some of these questions, changes, revisions, suggestions in the standards and system fundamental section are covered in this section. Yes, unfortunately, one of the dangers of looking at this piecemeal rather than as a whole. Yeah, thanks, Andrea. So maybe some of you felt that too, that some of the questions or concerns are addressed in some of these guiding principles. Might not be, but if it is, let's recognize that they are part of it and part of the document. I get this document now, thank you. Adding to the quote that was used, methods that promote each child's development and learning through a strengths-based. Yep, so adding to that piece there. A suggestion to add to the trauma-informed piece, trauma-informed care recognizes behavior as communication and coping and seeks to understand the why behind behaviors. And another one there, understand that people are not defined by their trauma and are more than their trauma. SEL standards should strive to support students' dreams and aspirations and interests. So a desire there to add a little bit more framing to the trauma-informed section. Recognizing behaviors, communication, and coping, and recognizing people are not defined by their trauma, and that we're supporting students' dreams, aspirations, and interests. Great. So what I think we should do now, I've created 3 breakout rooms, including one for the guiding principles, but given the suggestions on the guiding principles, I don't think we need to spend a lot of time there. I think Vanessa could make some quick edits to those pieces based on your suggestions. But where I do think we need to spend time with our last 35 minutes is in the system standards and the student standards. And I saw Jill's comments, much easier to make suggestions, not write them. Holly agrees, I hear that. And because of the nature of this advisory group, we have to take votes as a group. And so it means that we have to have something to all see to look at to vote on. And because we only have one more meeting, it's important that we start this process now to see how close we are, because the last meeting should just be a final sign off. So what I'm gonna suggest we do is I'm gonna open the rooms. I am just gonna 2 rooms, system standards and student standards. And we're gonna spend 10 minutes in these 2 rooms. I'm gonna join the student standards group. And I wonder if Beth and Alexa could join the system standards group. And what I want you to do is reflect on the conversation we just had. You can refer back to the document where people gave feedback and see if there are specific edits to the current recommendations that you want to suggest. So we're still going to be working in the 7 revised recommendations, draft for feedback 7/22/22 document. And in your small group, decide if there are edits, additions to be made to those recommendations. And we'll come back. And I'm really gonna push you, thanks Vanessa. If you're just like, well, we need something about this thing, I'm really gonna push you to say like, well, what is the specific thing you wanna name in the recommendations? If it's more framing, I would not put that in the recommendations. We can get to that in the report pieces about why SEL is important, some of the framing pieces. If there's some wording that's not ideal, but you can live with it for this moment, let's really just capture what are the concepts that are missing that you want to name specifically in the recommendations. Any questions about what we're going to do for 10 minutes in small groups? Okay, so I'm going to open these 2 rooms and you should let you choose which one you want to join, the system standards or the student standards. And again, you're going to edit directly in this document. And then we'll come back after 10 minutes. Beth, will you join the system standards one? Is anyone having trouble seeing the room?
Mine's not popping up any groups. Maybe let me
Oh.
see.
I don't see the rooms.
Mine,
At the bottom of the Zoom screen, do you have a button that says breakout room?
I see it now. I should have clicked on it. Awesome. Thank you.
Do you see it, Jill?
Jim, do you see where you're heading?
See, I see the breakout rooms, but I don't know how to get into them.
Okay, yeah, so if
There it
you,
is. You just hover over the number.
yep, there you go.
All righty,
Thanks, Jim.
you bet.
Melinda, how about you?
Nailed it. Thank you all for letting us switch that up and engage you in the writing of it. I think it helps us get closer to consensus and get your beautiful brains in the reworking of it. So I appreciate you all being willing to jump into that. We are gonna take consensus votes on what we have. What I want us to think about is like, are the main concepts all captured in each section that you think are essential? So if there remains some like word tweaking those pieces, you'll have another chance to give feedback on the full report. And you can also note those things in the recommendations as they exist. But for the sake of knowing if we are close to capturing the pieces, I really want you to think, does this capture the intent? Does this capture the main concepts we need for each of these sections, for the student standards and implementation, for the system standards and implementation, and for the guiding principles? And like I said, if there are other wording things you want us to address, let's note those, but let's not let those prevent us from getting as close as possible to consensus. So I'm going to start with the guiding principles. My children are playing chase right outside my door. I'm going to start with the guiding principles because I'm hoping we're very close there. We took your feedback around trauma-informed pieces, and we can hold that we'll make some edits to there, but want to do a 0 through 5 vote on, are these guiding principles reflective of what we want there? I'm going to put the language around what the 0 through 5 means up really quickly. So again, if we're all at a 3 or above, it means there might be some minor things, but overall you're not going to block it. If you really feel like there are issues that need discussion or that aren't in alignment with other guiding principles or the work, then you would vote a 2, 1, or 0. Okay, and we are going to do this in that same document where you were taking notes earlier. I'm going to share a bookmark that should take you right to a chart that says guiding principles and says your name and then a 0 through 5 vote. So we are looking at the 7/22/22 version. Vanessa walked through them. I'm going to screen share. So we have equity centered, strengths based, transform systems through inclusive practices, trauma informed, which we will continue to make some additional edits to based on your feedback, developmentally appropriate, and student caregiver and community partnerships, and alignment with other ODE efforts. So if you would give a vote to these guiding principles in the document. Thank you.
Sorry, where in the document?
Sorry, the link I just shared should take you right to the, yep, it's down at the bottom, guiding principles. There's a table. 5, 6, 7. All right. Given that's all 4s, we're gonna make some basic edits and we have guiding principles. Woo! All right, 1 down. Good work, team. Okay. I don't know where to go next. Let's go to the student standards next. Let's go right into it. So I'm gonna screen share where the group just edited. And then if those who are making those edits want to share what you made. So we still have the braiding. There was some feedback about making this braid horizontal, so it doesn't look like there's a scale here. Some other minor pieces of feedback, but the big concepts that got added here, E, F, and G. Does that group want to share the overview of what these are?
Unmute if you want to do it instead of me. Okay, what did we say? E, I think what we were talking about there is that the standards, we were looking at the one around how it should align and integrate with things like MTSS. And so the standards should be able to create a richer story around children. Like we should be able to talk about them in a more complex way as a result of having the standards there. And it should be able to inform any planning or any other supports that students might need, but not necessarily be used as a way to just identify and put kids in tracks and things like that, and like, you know, lower levels of behavior, whatever. I'm sure we'll see some gnarly stuff. And F, we were talking about, it's not about just designating what is and isn't appropriate behavior, which is oftentimes what most people think SEL is, and not just used as a way to exclude or track students. So we made that more explicit there. And the last one, that we were naming that standards in the past have been used to perpetuate, cause harm from people with non-dominant social identities. And so with the intent of our SEL standards, we will not do that. And so we're proposing that people do an engagement process and include diverse people in the creation of those standards.
Thank you. So some more explicit about what the standard should not be. And then we've added in as an MTSS processes here. We did some editing here around temporarily impact, can impact, editing as we go. Understanding that stress, toxic stress, and trauma can impact the development of competencies, and race and oppression are forms of both toxic stress and trauma. And we've left CASEL and competencies and the SEL constructs, transformative SEL constructs, as braided. So we're going to take a consensus vote on that. Let me stop sharing. So again, if you're a 3, 4, or 5, it means you think that we have in general captured what needs to be captured here, and you aren't going to block it. If you feel like there are minor tweaks needed, you can note those in the document. If there are big things you need that you think we need discussion on, then you would be a 2, a 1, or a 0 if you cannot at all live with what's here. So I just put in a bookmark into the table where we're going to vote. So we're voting on student standards and implementation guidance, the piece we just walked through. there's anything you need to raise or say or ask in order to feel like you can vote, you please do so in the chat or unmute.
I think we might be voting in 2 different grids.
Oh, is that the issue?
Yeah, I think so too. And it's changed and the titles were different and then people were changing in different spots, Amy. So I think that
Oh,
that's
great.
probably the issue.
Okay, because I was seeing like people are being very thoughtful. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 3. Okay, so let me just screen share so we're all on the same page here. All right, so here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 votes, all at a 3 or above. And then others were voting down here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Some people voted in 2 places, but
Yeah, I think I'm on there twice.
okay. I'm seeing all 3s, 4s, or 5s. So if you're a 3 and there are pieces you want to flag in the recommendations for small tweaks or edits, you can do so when we send out the next version, or if you want to flag it before we go. But this means we have consensus on the general outline of the student standards recommendations. So congratulations. Good work, team. Okay, last one. We're gonna get it right at the buzzer. There's gonna be no reflection at the end of this meeting, but we're gonna talk about system standards. Okay, so the system standards group, let me get down. Sorry, I'm gonna make you dizzy for a second. All right, so the system standards. I see there's a piece added here, culturally responsive and appropriate and trauma-informed evaluation and assessment of SEL implementation, connected to state role. I see that ODE should create guidance that supports assessment evaluation of implementation that can also identify direct supports for individual students and specific student groups, identifies where schools and districts are successful and need additional supports resources, doesn't perpetuate harm, trauma, racism, systems of oppression, and doesn't rank or sort students. So very aligned with what got written in the student standards piece 2. Is there anything else that group wants to say about what you added or edited?
I'd say we were rushed at the end, so we didn't have time to flesh out exactly what that would say. So
For D here.
for it all.
Okay,
So
but you
it was
feel like
the gist of it, I think, maybe.
Yeah,
right?
kind of at the end where we got a little rushed too was wanting to add something under school culture about, and I would even call that school and district culture, about how assessment and evaluation gets done at that level versus just at the state level, because the best assessment and evaluation is going to happen closest to the student and the system as opposed to at the state level. So that's why we said reference the language in below.
7. Yeah. I do feel like that's very connected to the pieces that got added into the system standards around not using evaluation to rank. We can look there really quick too. Here we go. Not for tracking. Should be used to facilitate dialogue, reflection, and deep understanding. Is that getting to some of what that conversation was in the system standards? Okay.
I would say not so much E, but more around G, F and G.
Okay.
But then sort of more at the implementation level, the adult behavior level.
Okay.
And I think we tried to capture that by saying the adult and system in there. That was
what they're doing well and what they need to improve at the individual classroom and systems level. Okay. So if there are additional pieces from that group that you don't feel like were in here as far as fleshing it out, but you do feel like the main points got captured. Okay. Okay. Let's take a vote. So let me stop that for a second. Hold on before you vote, because I'm gonna share a link to the exact chart that I want you to vote in. Oh, someone put the names there. Perfect. All right. All right, this bookmark should take you directly to the chart. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think that's everybody. I'm gonna screen share. So I see 10 votes, all at 3s or above, with some flagging around final language, fleshing out the wording. So we are at consensus for the system standards. We'll do some final editing based on your feedback, and then you will do final votes at the August meeting. But you all should feel very proud of how far we got today. I appreciate you all leaning into the conversation. I feel really good about where we're landing. I hope you all feel like your expertise and experience is reflected in what's here. Vanessa, do you want to close us out for today?
Yeah, just thank you again. And I'll be sharing an update with just a timeline that shows where we're heading in the upcoming weeks till our August meeting, which is on August 22nd. That is the final time. So we're hoping, and based on the feedback from the Google form, it looks like most of all of us will be in attendance. So by that point, you should have the final drafts. Folks are still working on some of the content who I've identified in our last email. There's some editing, citations, last kind of steps around that, and then cleaning up these recommendations. And so you should have that within a week or two, I'm hoping, before the next last meeting. So you have time to really sit through and read all of the components as a holistic piece as we look at really sending that off. So I think the only thing I really need, and I don't think we're going to do our little poll, but if you're interested in joining me with the presentation to the State Board of Education, I would love that since it is your all's wisdom and thinking that is part of this. So would love someone or a couple of folks to join me in that presentation on September 22nd. And we can work together on that. You won't be alone. And just looking forward to sending this off and our next incarnation of where this goes. So let's just end with 2 words to capture how you're feeling as we close out our night together.
I did, Vanessa can follow up with this in email. I just put this survey link in the chat, which asks you if you're holding any remaining concerns or questions, if you want to present at the state board, and if you have any interest in writing the intro to the report.
Yeah, thank you for that last piece. Efficient and grateful. Still hopeful, yay. Grateful and hungry. I know. I've been curious what Subin's been eating. Excited and relieved. Yay. Good work and back to my vacation. Yes, indeed. Thanks, Jill, for joining us on your vacation. Ooh, noodles with veggies. That sounds way better than my frozen pizza tonight. Productive and hopeful. Yay, excited, energized. So some nice themes here around just excitement and hopefulness. So that's a great way to send us off into our meals or our walks with our dogs. We're waiting to get outside. Maybe it's not so hot anymore. So thank you all. Tremendous gratitude. Reach out if you need anything, and good, awesome work.
Thanks all.